I'm Joe Sergi. I'm a professor emeritus, meaning I've been retired for a couple of years from Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech stands for Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in the state of Virginia in the United States, and also affiliated with Northwest University in South Africa as an extraordinary professor. Um, I've been involved with quality of life research. My goodness, so many years for the last 40 something years. And I've done quite a bit of research in that area, and it's a passion of mine. Um, and So what I'll be doing this morning is give you a sort of an understanding of how we can approach the whole idea of human rights from a quality of life perspective. So that would, yeah, give you sort of a flavor for what we do in the context of quality of life research and in the context of the International Society of Quality of Life Studies. This is essentially our professional home. For those who are not familiar with the International Society of Quality of Life Studies, it is an organization, it is a professional society of academicians, mostly academicians, that are involved in quality of life research. So if you're involved in quality of life research, please make ISCLS, we call it ISCLS for short, as your professional home. And we're going to have our next conference in Vermont in the United States in August. So we would welcome you there. Okay, well, let me get started. Again, the title of this presentation is Universal Rights Monitoring, a Quality of Life Perspective. I understand that you're very much interested in disability. And of course, the idea of that the disabled have certain rights and they have to be upheld. To approach the whole idea of disability monitoring and as a human right, it would be kind of educational or informative to try and understand how we in the quality of life indicators movement approach this idea of measuring quality of life. And as you can see from this slide, we usually measure quality of life at the individual level, at the community level, and the societal level. And we make the distinction between outcome indicators and action indicators. When it comes to outcome indicators and action indicators, we also make the distinction between well-being indicators and ill-being indicators. So there's quite a distinction between, quality of life, the positive aspects of quality of life, and of course, the negative aspects would be ill-being. In that context, we also make the distinction between quality of life indicators in terms of the elements or the parts versus the whole. So we'll illustrate this. And again, if we'd be able to talk about disability or the disabled in that context, that would be fruitful. Our approach is very much based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs in psychology and in management, as well as in the social sciences in general, is a very popular model, motivational model, and in essence it focuses on the fact that there is an assortment of human needs that need to be satisfied in any context. So let's say if we're talking about the disabled have certain basic needs, as in terms of physiological needs and safety needs, as well as psychological needs, as in esteem needs and belongingness needs, and self-actualization all the way up to what you call self-fulfillment needs. So we make the distinction between basic needs. Basic needs are essentially, as you can see from the slide, you've got safety needs and physiological needs. And then, the top part of the pyramid, you can think of those needs as growth needs. So in the quality of life movement, we make the distinction between flourishing versus meeting basic needs. And in the context of the disabled, you can actually think of human rights for the disabled tend to focus mostly on basic needs. We need to make the disabled life tolerable in the sense that they can survive, but not necessarily in a flourishing way. And this is where, again, the distinction between ill-being and well-being. So you try to reduce the ill-being of the disabled, but from the perspective of human rights, do we do much about trying to enhance their well-being? And I submit to you that we don't do enough in terms of the flourishing component or the well-being component. We do a lot in terms of reducing the ill-being, but not enough in terms of enhancing the well-being, right? So when we're talking about ill-being versus well-being, again, ill-being tend to focus on basic needs, and well-being tends to focus on the growth needs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let's look at the individual level and look at the indicators associated with ill-being versus well-being. And in that context, let's focus on outcome indicators. So we're making the distinction between outcome indicators and action indicators. Action indicators are indicators related to policy. So we're talking about public policy or possibly institutional kinds of policies or programs that as you can see from the chart, impact outcome indicators. But let's start out with outcome indicators. What are outcome indicators? These are examples of parts versus whole. And if we're looking at ill-being, and if you're looking at the disabled, ultimately we want to reduce ill-being for the disabled, as in we should monitor their disease incidence, pain, as well as health risks. We should monitor their psychopathology and emotional suffering. We should monitor their disability and daily functioning. We should monitor their degree of victimization. We should monitor their housing deficiency and adequate shelter, income sufficiency and basic material possessions, and so forth. So these are things that are related to basic needs. And from a human rights perspective, we try to do our best to try and alleviate the suffering. So we're, on the whole, we're making life for the disabled tolerable, as you can see from the bottom part of the slide. So that is our goal. But we don't do much on the right-hand side of the slide in terms of human well-being. So if we're talking about ensuring that the disabled would have a life of high sociability and good friendships, that they would have a sense of belonging, and they would have group affiliation, that they would engage in leisure activities, that they would engage in sports and recreational activities, that they would have a good occupation or occupational status and prestige, that they would be financially successful, on and on. These are the things that would make life flourish. So if you try to focus on the well-being aspects of the disabled, we're looking at well-being, enhancing well-being rather than reducing ill-being. So the idea, if you look at the very bottom of the slide, which says whole, indicators of personal happiness, our goal would be to try and make them happy, not necessarily to make life tolerable. Tolerable is to reduce ill-being, but personal happiness is to enhance well-being, right? So from the human rights perspective, there's quite a bit of difference between looking at human rights from an ill-being perspective versus a well-being perspective. And of course, our goal is to be able to expand the umbrella, so to speak, by reducing ill-being as well as enhancing well-being. These are essentially the indicators that we work with at the individual level. So let me go to the next slide, and the next slide would focus on what we do in order to produce a high level of well-being and a lower level of ill-being. So what are those action indicators? As you can see from the slide, action indicators of well-being and versus ill-being can be further decomposed in terms of indicators of individual efforts as well as institutional efforts. Well, let's focus on what, for example, the disabled do in order to reduce their ill-being as well as enhance their well-being. So there are many things that they would do in terms of their own individual efforts. So if you're looking at the left-hand side of the slide, indicators of individual efforts to reduce disease incidence. What do they do in order to make themselves healthy, rather than counting on institutions to do it for them? So all of these are indicators that related to action, individual action for people to help themselves. So indicators of individual efforts to reduce disease incidence, pain and health risk, indicators of individual efforts to reduce psychopathology and emotional suffering, indicators of individual efforts to reduce disability and enhance daily functioning, and so forth. These are individual efforts, and we have quality of life indicators that, again, focus on what we call these action indicators that would reduce ill-being. Now, if you look at the other side of the table, and that these are action indicators related to human well-being. Again, if we're applying this to the disabled, then the idea is to be able to monitor the level of what do they do themselves, individual efforts to increase sociability and friendship, belongingness and group affiliation, leisure engagement, leisure and sports and recreational activities, and so forth. What do they do themselves, and what are those indicators? And if we can start thinking in terms of these as human rights for the disabled. Now, of course, we're not anywhere close to doing that, but I challenge those people who are involved in the human rights movement to think in terms of well-being as human rights, not only in terms of reducing ill-being for the disabled. When it comes to institutional efforts, meaning what do institutions do to help, again, promote what you call action indicators that would influence outcome indicators. So let's look at some examples of institutional efforts. And in that context, if we're talking about what organizations, what government does, what NGOs do in order to reduce ill-being, these would be, again, things, institutional efforts to reduce these things, from disease incidence to psychopathology and so forth. Institutional efforts. So what are those policies? What are those programs that are designed to reduce ill-being for the disabled in this fashion? But again, in terms of institutional efforts, institutional efforts to enhance well-being, I don't think there's hardly anything out there. But if we challenge ourselves to start thinking of what institutions can do in order to enhance well-being, again, in terms of those policies, those programs, then we're looking at the right side of the table, and that is indicators of institutional efforts to increase sociability and friendships, belongingness and group affiliation, leisure engagement, recreational activities, and so forth. Again, so that is the challenge. So I was told that I can only not go over 20 minutes, correct? Zara?
Yes,
Should I
yes.
wrap it up or should I keep going? How much time do I have?
Once you're 30 minutes, it's okay. You can
No.
keep going, no problem.
Okay. If that's
We
the case,
enjoy listening and learning.
great. Okay. So we do the same thing at the community level. So we have outcome indicators and action indicators, and we make distinction between well-being versus ill-being. And when it comes to the community, so what is the quality of life of a community? So if we're looking at a community as in a geographical community, as a neighborhood, and people, let's say the disabled are residing in a community, so we can talk about action indicators and outcome indicators at the community level, and we can focus on outcome indicators, indicators in terms of parts versus whole, and these would be examples of what happens at the community level. So here we have indicators of human well-being would be environmental pollution. So you want to make sure that you want to reduce environmental pollution in the community, disease incidents in the community, crime and safety in the community, housing conditions. You want to essentially make housing conditions tolerable or at least acceptable. You want to reduce unemployment. You want to reduce poverty and homelessness, on and on. So these are the things that you can do, and you monitor those indicators associated with those quality of life dimensions related to ill-being. On the other hand, if you're looking at the community level and you're focusing on human well-being, you're looking at things like what in the community can be done in order to enhance or increase work productivity and income for the community at large, consumption and non-basic goods and services, indicators of quality of leisure and recreational activities. Again, this would be at the community level. And you see, so these are the elements or the parts associated with the dimensions, the quality of life dimensions. But at large, the whole, if you're looking at the whole, would be indicators of community cohesion and growth. Cohesion. So the extent to which the community is cohesive in the sense that they identify themselves as belonging to that community, and they grow with that identity in mind. But on the other hand, if you're looking at human ill-being at the community level, the whole would be just to survive, community survival and resilience, to bounce back from adversity in the best way possible. The same thing can be said in terms of the action indicators at the community level. So action indicators at the community level would be things, what does the government do? So government efforts to enhance, to reduce environmental pollution, for example. When it comes to the community, what are these institutional efforts to enhance productivity and quality of work life? Government efforts to enhance consumer well-being, for example. These would be, again, human well-being dimensions. So again, these are other examples where the business comes in, the business community come in, and what does the business community contribute to the community in terms of quality of life. And here we have examples of indicators related to reducing human ill-being at the community level, and indicators associated with increasing human well-being, again, at the community level. So example would be, what do business enterprises, business organizations do in order to, again, reduce environmental pollution in the community? So that would be example there. When it comes to human well-being, what does, for example, business do to enhance productivity and quality of work life? And what are those indicators associated with those? The same thing can be said with NGOs, meaning non-government organization, and what are those action indicators related to NGOs? So we flesh out those indicators accordingly. At the societal level, if you're focusing at the society or the country at large, we have the same thing, and when we make the distinction between outcome indicators and action indicators, and when it comes to indicators of parts versus whole, you can see from this chart. At the societal level, again, we're dealing with similar kinds of dimensions, but at the country at large. So as you can see, the whole, when it comes to the whole, it would be national pride and identity. When it comes to ill-being, what you want to do is you want to reduce the chances of what you call a failing state. I'm thinking in terms of Syria right now. Syria is considered to be a failing state. So what are those indicators that would allow you to monitor the level of the failing state? And of course, ultimately, once you have those monitors in place, then you'd be able to develop policies and programs to make it a non-failing state, that kind of thing. The business community and other types of institutions are involved equally in producing programs and policies, and we need to monitor their progress in terms of those action indicators. So again, in those slides, I have many examples of those action indicators, as you can see. So for those of you who might be interested in this and you want to have those slides, then please send me an email and I will send you the whole set of slides. But let me just finish by saying that from a quality of life perspective, again, we have differences between outcome indicators and action indicators, and indicators related to the parts versus whole, indicators related to ill-being versus well-being. And what we do is we monitor those indicators at the individual level, at the community level, and at the societal level. And of course, it can be easily applied to a specific population segment, such as the disabled. Okay, now I can stop. So,
Yes, it was a great presentation and sharing with us. I have a firm belief that participants and of course we also enlighten our vision based on this perspective, quality of perspective. Dear participants, do you want to raise any questions to Professor Joseph? If you have any question, don't hesitate to ask. Sharing is good value for enriching our quality of perspective. Any questions? Any comments you want to raise?
or if it's all possible, what we can do is we can, if there's a chat room, you can type your questions in there.
Yes, they are using the chat box, and I think there is a one question from IPEC. Yes, IPEC, you can raise your questions. Item mentioned, thank you. Item mentioned on the chat box that thank you for so much, dear Professor Joseph. It was great chance for us to be here with you. Yes, definitely is a great chance for us, all of us. Okay, Ipek, your turn.
First of all, I'm really very happy, and I am say to thank you, Professor Fahriye, because you are open a lot of windows in our mind, and Mr. Joseph and Mrs. Deepika. Thank you, because it is very important for collaboration for different university and different professors partnership. Because if we are working only one part of education system, it is not good as like a Voltron. And I would like to ask you, because I'm an art educator, and a lot of international creation, some of art event, and Maslow hierarchy of needs, it's really very important for us, because if you are start creative thinking and aesthetic, you are complete your self motivation. And what you think about art for development ourselves, because basic needs we are take it now, and physiologic needs after COVID-19. A lot of countries it's destroyed and healing again. But I want to learn from you, Mr. Joseph, self-fulfillment needed, how we can collaborate with art. I want to take from you your opinion. I know it is not enough time for explain everything, but if you use a few sentences, I'm really glad to hear from you.
Did you say how we can collaborate? Is that what you're asking? How we can collaborate? What's the goal? The goal is to focus on the disabled, and what can we do in order to enhance the quality of life of the disabled? Is that the question?
Exactly.
Well, from the perspective of quality of life, the best thing that we can do as scientists is to be able to develop the indicators to monitor the level of their quality of life. And the science of quality of life and the metrics and the measures that we have that are already published out there, and the ones that are already provided examples of, would give you an idea of how scientists that are involved in the quality of life movement can contribute to enhancing the quality of life of the disabled by monitoring, by providing the metrics that would allow practitioners like you to be able to use to monitor the level of quality of life of the disabled at various levels, at the individual level, at the community level, at the societal level, and what are those programs that are in place and the effectiveness associated with those programs and policies and laws that would ensure that the disabled have their rights assured, their rights not violated. That's the best we can do.